So good morning everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar organized within the framework of the project Roadmap 2. I am Daniela Di Bucci, I am the project coordinator, and I would like to thank you, my colleagues, partners from the project who organized this webinar, and also I would like to warmly thank our invited speakers, Laurent Bontou, Simon Kimpeler, and UC Coron. Thank you, everyone. Let me introduce a little bit the contents of our project, and then I will leave the floor to Professor Domingos Viegas and Professor Catiorlo, who will manage the workshop. So I would like to share the screen just to, yes. Good. So Roadmap is a project called the European Observatory on Disaster Risk and Crisis Management Best Practices Way Ahead because we follow a previous project that was called Roadmap. This is the partnership. The project is coordinated by the Italian Sea Protection Department, where I work. There are 4 scientific partners, CI3R, which is a consortium of research institutes that work in Italy, and it's called Italian Center for Research and Risk Reduction. It is composed by 8 competence centers that work with the Sea Protection Department, and in this specific project, there are 3 centers who work with us, namely CIMA Foundation, Center Foundation, and the Lewis. Then there is the University of Stavanger in Norway. There is the Association for the Development of Industrial Aerodynamics, ADAI, in Portugal, and University of Tartu in Estonia. The project lasts 2 years, is funded by DG ECO. We are in the middle because we are just ended the first year of activities. And we said that we started from a previous roadmap. We had a lot of products for this previous project, in particular a Solutions Explorer, so an open source web platform that hosts good practices. Our project deals with the collection and sharing of good practices in general. We produce periodical bulletins, we produce thematic papers, we published a vision paper, and we organized 3 webinars. And this is the long-lasting tradition which now follow with this new series of webinars. Roadmap 2 starts from the idea that there are some specific challenges that need to be overcome that are raised during Roadmap. So our objects are the establishment of a community for the European Observatory of Good Practices. This community of experts is aimed at improving knowledge, understanding, and replicability of good practices in disaster risk management. And we also aim at building and sharing knowledge through a cycle of seminars and collaborative workshops that are based on these good practices. So we are dealing with good practices in disaster risk management of interest for sea protection activities. And these activities are strictly related with the European Sea Protection Knowledge Network that is based in DG ECO. Very quickly, the project is organized in 5 work packages. The first one deals with the coordination and management of the project. So we manage the activities and deal with the reports. The second work package deals with the community for the European Observatory of Good Practices. And as you will see, there are many activities interrelated with the other work packages. The third activity is related to the scenarios. So we have the framework for identifying and assessing good practices in disaster risk management, and we work on example scenarios. We have interrelation, as you can see, also in this case. The fourth work package deals with the new version of the Solutions Explorer, which is this web platform, and there is here the link that you can use to consult it. And these are the links with the other groups. And then the final work packages, it deals with the relation to the other work, to the to the knowledge sharing. And here we have collaborative workshops, webinars, test exercises, and so on. And these include the webinars. And this is the first webinar that we have. So there is a project website. I show with you the link here on this slide. And so please check into the link, the activities that are going on. And with this, I thank you once again, and I stop to share my screen, and I am happy to leave the floor to Professor Domingos Viegas from ADAI.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and thank you very much for this good introduction of the project and to this webinar. I'm Domingos Viegas from the University of Coimbra, ADAI in Portugal, and I take this opportunity also to greet all of you that are attending this webinar from many parts of the world. I see that around 300 persons are following us, and this shows the interest of this topic. Foresight is, for some of us, a new concept and something that is certainly emerging. So in the roadmap project, we are looking at these breaking themes, and this was one of the objects of our so-called flash reports. And we are grateful to the speakers that accepted our invitation in the relatively short notice to participate in this webinar. My team is in charge of organizing the webinar in technical terms, and I take this opportunity to inform you that you can ask questions to the speakers, and you should use for that the question and answers box that you have there. You can write your question. Please tell to whom you are addressing the question, and we will try to convey this message to the speaker. And if possible, if you have time, we will reply to the questions. After each intervention, there will be very little time to ask a very quick question if there is, but otherwise there will be a period of discussion, general discussion of all the three speakers in the end of the meeting. And saying this, I thank you again and give the floor to Katie Oro, who will manage and moderate the webinar. Katie.
Thank you, Domingos. Very warm welcome to all of you to this first seminar of Roadmap 2 project. And in this seminar, we indeed focus on the foresight techniques and how these could be applied, and what are the lessons learned from applying these foresight thinking and principles in disaster risk management. So the idea is to exchange between the policymakers, but also the practitioners from the member states of European Union, the good practices and sort of novel practices, as for example these foresight techniques are, and to learn and to spread the word around the community of civil protection managers and disaster risk managers about how can we enhance our thinking in a longer term, in a longer future, in terms of the challenges and also the future risks that we should be bearing in mind when conducting our risk analysis, and that have already very rigorous methodologies. But how do these new kind of novel ideas about using, for example, horizon scanning or scenario building in collaboration with various experts, how can these techniques be used in the disaster management and planning context? So in order to tackle these questions about what are the benefits of foresight for the disaster risk management planning, what are the current practices by disaster management and civil protection actors in terms of using the foresight techniques, and what could enable to further use and to use it even by more people in different member states or in different levels of disaster management and planning. How can we make it more accessible, these techniques? How can we spread the word, and how can we build up the skills for that? These are the main questions for today's webinar. And I'm really glad that we have very good specialists in this field have agreed to join and give their perspectives. So first we will Florent Pontou from European Union Joint Research Center will give his perspective. He is the representative of the Foresight Center at the Joint Research Center, and but this will and he will focus on the sort of European perspective on what can how can we enhance the current risk analysis by adding the perspectives of Foresight. Then the second speaker will be Simone Gimpeler from Fraunhofer Institute, and he will give a very practical experience of how on the European policy levels and in the different fields of policy and particularly the disaster risk management, the Foresight perspectives have been applied already. And finally, we have a very practical member state experience by Jussi Korhonen from Finnish Ministry of Interior Affairs, and he will explain their Finnish experience in terms of doing the risk analysis on the national level, but also on the regional level using the Foresight perspective. So I'm really glad that we have all the speakers with us. They will speak for about 20 minutes, and then just after their presentation, we can ask one or two very quick questions. But then after all the presentations, we have still some half an hour for a common discussion and for common exchange. And where I will also try to engage the questions from the question and chat, question and answers forum. But I think we can go on. And Florent, please, could you start? I will while you are. I will just say a few words about Florent. I mentioned that he's a senior Foresight expert in the European Union Joint Research Center, competence for Foresight, and he has also been a member of cabinet for European Vice President in charge of Foresight for policy. And his daily work involves bringing future-oriented systemic thinking into European Union policymaking, using inclusive and participatory techniques with key stakeholders. Thank you, Laurent, for joining us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kati. Thank you very much to the Roadmap 2 project to have invited me here today. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to try and give you a sort of helicopter view, a sort of appetizer of how Foresight could actually contribute to risk analysis for disaster risk management. So I hope you can see my slides now. Very, very quickly, hang on a second, like this, very slow. Yes. So I'm going to very quickly go through the basics of risk, but I'm sure that all of you know that. Very quickly also about a few points about what Foresight does. And then how Foresight can be applied to what I call forward-looking risk assessment. And then I will finish by describing some specific tools that can be used more practically. So you all know what risk is. You know, we have some hazard, you know, combined with some sort of vulnerability. And then if you combine this with the exposure to these hazards, then you can assess the level of risk that people are facing. So when we talk about risk analysis, we go through risk assessment, which is trying to quantify, the amount of risk that we're facing as much as possible. So this is very often a process which is as scientific as possible. Then we have the issue of risk perception and risk communication, which should not be underestimated when we want to manage risk. It's important to understand how people see risk, how they are likely to react to risks, and we have to communicate that well according to the circumstances, according to the culture of the group of people we are engaging with, and also depending on the level of trust which is available, in the context. And essentially, what's important here is to do that, to empower people to keep out of harm's way. And there we have to start to look at risk as a social construct. There are many different views about risk, many different types of perception of risk. And so I think that here we have to bring about other dimensions into the risk analysis. And then finally, there is the risk management, but I'm sure that you're all expert in this, which is there to really minimize the impact of the risk. So the traditional context for risk analysis is really that it is based on what people are familiar with, they can control. It's the state-of-the-art science, the state-of-the-art knowledge. It's relying on what's known about hazards, what's known about modes of exposure. It's very much based on experience. It's informed by, history. And we try to protect ourselves, by extrapolating the past to get ready for what might come. And hazards very often are considered, individually. It's people look at a fire or a flood or a, earthquake. And the problem we're facing now is that a lot of the basic conditions, a lot of the historical conditions that we're used to know, let's say, are changing. We're living through a period of very fast change. Some people call it systemic transformation. And what's characteristic of today's world is that we're facing also increasing complexity in all our societal and governance systems. So we're living through a period of fast change, of increasing complexity. And so we have to be able to start to consider what we call emerging risks. So we have hazards that can be appearing, which are new. For example, I was hearing my daughter recently, talking about a tornado in Belgium. This is a new hazard. 10 years ago, we didn't have that. This was something for the US. Or when we talk about known hazards, we can have new exposures. For example, population grows. So one area where you had fewer people, 10 or 20 years ago might be you have a larger population, or you could have an increased vulnerability. And so these are things that can allow you to actually detect what risks are emerging, and then based on what can be observed today. And so if we start to introduce a forward-looking approach to risk analysis, we can start to think about how to use foresight. And where foresight can help is, for example, in risk assessment, to help identify new possible hazards or new possible exposures. Foresight being very often based on building narratives, can be used to create stories that can help change risk perception. You can increase the sense of urgency about some risk, or you can put things in a different perspective thanks to stories that are oriented towards the future that are generated by foresight exercises. And then by playing, what if cases and putting these what if cases in the context of the broader narratives that I was mentioning before, you can help improve preparedness, especially when you want to connect dots across, complex systems. So the objectives of that kind of work to apply foresight, to risk management is for sure to mitigate risks, to prevent crises, to improve the capacity to deal with uncertainties, and very often by better coordinating, different groups of people, and improving preparedness in general. So I'll go through a few tools, later on in my presentation, but basically foresight can help, on several points. Foresight can help to identify future risk factors, in a holistic perspective. Very often, if you create scenarios, you can help understand what are the key factors, that are driving the change that we are experiencing in our societies, or in our industrial systems, or in our, environmental factors. There are tools in Foresight that can help understand, not only the direct consequences, but also second or third order consequences. By being very inclusive of a broad range of stakeholders, Foresight can help engage with complexity, by really putting to contribution and going through constructive methods, a diversity of views. People might disagree on points, but thanks to Foresight methods and the creation of scenarios, you can actually place in a constructive way diversities of views that can help actually deepen the analysis that people are doing of the risks. Of course, as a basic factor to start with Foresight exercise, we identify agents, factors, drivers of change that I was just mentioning. And also, it can help explore how systems can evolve. It can give a sense of dynamics, the kinds of dynamics that can be at play, when you have hazards actually playing out. And Foresight is also something that helps people be systematic in this kind of approaches. Yeah? And so it's quite helpful to help think about things in a 360-degree perspective to make sure that we don't forget some elephant in the room. And Foresight has got a number of tools that can actually help people engage in these kind of things. It's a very quickly example of possible new hazards. I mean, new viruses. We've seen this with COVID. So, all of a sudden you've got a hazard that was not known before that emerges. I was just mentioning something relating to weather. Relating to climate change, new exposures very often are coming from expanded ranges of disease vectors, mosquitoes carrying viruses to places where they were not there before. Stronger impacts of climate change, new vulnerabilities. Very often, top of the range factors are aging populations or aging infrastructures, which are no longer adapted to our new complex and fast-moving society. So these are examples. So the Foresight scenarios, back to this little scheme on emerging risk, can help identify possible new hazards. They can help identify possible new exposures, and they can help very much detect possible increased vulnerabilities, in different parts of the systems that might not be immediately obvious. So if we look at what I call the anticipation timescale, we can put this on a time arrow where a lot of the world revolves now about what's happening in the recent past and today. Then if we project ourselves a month into the future, we have forecasting systems like weather forecasts, for example, that can help with some level of early identification. But then when you go into Foresight, you can start to consider things that are years into the future by applying scenarios, and that can be 10, 15, 20 years, or sometimes even longer. So this is a bit the time map on which we place Foresight work. So what kind of tools can be used for actually dealing with these emerging risks? I think first of all is what I would call a risk watch. So of course, the community is already very involved in all sorts of monitoring. And this is extremely useful. But then with horizon scanning, I think that we can get into something which is going a little bit beyond monitoring. We can apply this in different ways to look at already existing risks, of course. But if we apply a certain type of sense making to our horizon scanning, to our risk watch, we can pick up signals which could be used to make sense of things to come, which are not necessarily the things which are classically monitored. And by watching a very broad landscape, so beyond the usual monitoring categories, we can identify significant issues that can come to bear over the long term. But of course, this is an exercise that can never be completely exhausted. And that that relies on an ability of bringing together a large and diverse enough group of people that can actually make sense of signals beyond the usual culprits. Another tool, or another method, which is the workhorse, let's say, of Foresight work, is scenario building. And building Foresight scenarios is often going beyond what people call scenarios by making different model runs by changing some input parameters. Here we're building narratives of possible futures, which are really broadly encompassing of different aspects of life, and very often it's based on a reflection or organized around what we call the STEEP framework. So a framework which helps people consider social, technological, economic, environmental, and policy factors to make sure that we have an all-encompassing reflection that allows us to develop a systemic approach. And the first key step in scenario building, which is something I was just mentioning previously already, is the identification of the drivers of change. Which are the relevant factors which are changing and which will then, on their own, cause further changes that could lead to potential new hazards or potential new exposures that should be taken in disaster risk preparation. And in scenario building, what is also very important is to be inclusive in these kind of exercises, to have both all the different types of expertise which are needed to have a proper view of things. And thanks to being inclusive, you can create a community of understanding. So you can have a group of stakeholders which share the understanding of how things could evolve and where priorities can be set. And this exercise can be very useful over the long term when you have a group of people who understand each other well, and at the time of disaster response, that can actually come in very handy. So by investing time ahead, thinking about the long term, you actually create groups of people who shared an understanding of things, and that can come in handy in risk assessment and risk management. Another possible tool that can be applied to risk management and preparation for risk is scenario exploration. So once you have developed these narratives about the future, about how the future could be, you can actually take specific issues and then try them out in a multi-stakeholder environment within the scenarios that have been developed. And so you actually make simulations of some sort, and by making simulations in contrasting scenarios, because you always develop multiple scenarios, you help people consider how different dynamics, of impacts, but also dynamics between, responders or between groups of people could play out in specific situations. So that's also something that can be interesting. Another tool which is widely used in our own future risk project, at the JRC, is the futures wheel. And the futures wheel is really something quick and easy to apply to specific issues, where you place your specific issue, like on this diagram on the yellow dot in the middle, and you start to reflect again in a group of diverse people to identify what are the first consequences, and then after that, what are the second order and possibly the third order consequences of an event happening. And that helps put multiple points of view around the table to confront the different ideas. And it's a very convenient tool to structure a very quick brainstorm. That can be done, on a short basis. And this is something which is used by the JRC, which is developing a collaboration with the Roadmap 2 project. So that was my little, very quick and broad appetizer. We are really happy to help you all actually engage with Foresight tools more in depth, and we are ready to provide you with any advice that could come to use Foresight and long-term thinking into disaster risk management. And so Foresight can definitely apply to help people prepare for risk with a long-term dimension. I've just given you 4 very quick examples, but Foresight has got a very rich toolbox that can be applied to very specific situations. And I think where Foresight is probably able to bring the most added value is to actually foster the capacity to take a systemic perspective, to deal with the complexity and uncertainty inherent to risk preparation and risk management. So thank you very much for having been patient with me today. Thank you again to the Roadmap 2 project to have invited me here today, and I'm ready to answer to questions that you can have.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Laura. There are no questions in the questions forum, but I have a question actually. You mentioned that in the Foresight process, it's the use of the variety of different expertise is extremely useful and extremely beneficial in order to understand the future developments from different perspectives. Can you give examples of the different fields of experts that you have, for example, engaged, and also maybe explain a bit how do you maintain their interest in being involved in this process of thinking in a longer future terms?
Thank you very much, Kati, for this very, very good question. It's at the core of the quality of what Foresight can provide. When you start a Foresight exercise, what is very often underestimated, but is a crucial phase, is the scoping phase. So first you have to define, okay, what is the system I'm going to watch? What is the system I'm going to consider? What am I interested in? What is the result I want to get out of this? And then once you have determined this, so that's more client-based, you know, that's coming from the demand side. Then the next step is to actually map who are all the relevant stakeholders related to this system or this particular issue. Okay, and so here you have to be quite inclusive, and so you really have to map out who you think would be all the people who would have something relevant to say. And this goes beyond just the direct actors of the system or the people directly impacted, you know, because you have a lot of side stakeholders who have an interest, who have, you know, interesting views, who can contribute to the conversation. And the more diverse, you know, this mix of people who are going to discuss about this issue, actually the richer the result that you're going to get. Because if you take a group of people who is too homogeneous, you risk what we call tunnel thinking. You know, if it is all the engineers in charge of, you know, the response and knowing, you know, all the stuff, they're going to agree very easily on a number of things. And there are some assumptions that they have, which are completely invisible to them because it's so natural to them, you know, that they're not going to pick up. But somebody from another stakeholder perspective might see that assumption, challenge these group of people on that assumption. And actually, this will help everybody go deeper in the reflection to reassess how we understand things, and to actually develop a richer reflection about how to deal with your system and the potential risks associated to this. So this constructive diversity, I think, is fundamental to good quality foresight, and not only for risk management, in general, for decision making.
Thank you very much for this explanation. I see one more hand up. Domingos, Professor Domingos, please.
Thank you, Kati. Thank you, Laura, for your excellent talk. I have a question. This issue of foresight is something like looking in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you, does this require any special skills for the person who practices them, or can it be acquired? Or putting in other words, can everyone, let's say, try to practice this foresight of looking in the future?
Short answer is yes. The longer answer is but. I think what's important is to have somebody, when you organize a process like this, you have to have professionals who have experience, you know, to make sure that the process which is going to be developed and applied is the best suited to your specific question, and that it is run according to the state of the art, let's say, you know. So you have to engage with professionals to do this for sure at the start. Now, once you've been yourself through a couple of these processes, you can acquire this foresight literacy, this capacity to actually do foresight. And also we are here, to help people train in foresight and understand how to apply the different tools I was mentioning, for example. That's really not so difficult. But beyond this, if you look at the participants, for example, on the contrary, the participants don't need to have any specific preparation in foresight. So these processes are actually by nature very inclusive. It's very easy. So if you have a professional actually running the show, all the participants around don't have to have studied foresight or to be familiar with foresight. What they have to do is come up with their own real life expertise, experience, and be in a constructive mood in order to really make sure that the exercise is going to be useful. But usually, if the proper conditions are set from the start, people actually enjoy participating in a foresight exercise because the amount of learning from each other is very high. So very often you feel enriched after having participated in a foresight exercise, regardless.
Thank you. Thank you for this very encouraging note. I see Simone has her hand up as well, and Simone is the next speaker as well. That you can
Hi.
Start. Yes.
Hello. Don't worry. I don't want to start already. It's just that I realized that there are some really interesting questions raised in the questions and answer section, and I would like to maybe bring something of this here into this conversation and to ask Laurent to address these. For example, there is one about how would you manage to address new vulnerabilities, namely infrastructures, and the need to supply here essential services such as water. How can you highlight this in public policies? One question. And the other question is about how can you provide an environment where people can speak openly without fear to get the range of perspectives? So Laurent, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. They are quite crucial questions. The first one I think is relatively easy. The question about infrastructures. Infrastructures are typically things that develop over a very long time. And so that actually requires long-term strategic thinking, so you have to really consider timescales of, decades when you talk about infrastructures. And I think that we have plenty of cognitive biases in our human brains, which make us overestimate what we can achieve on our short term, but underestimate what we can achieve over the longer term. Because very often developments are not linear, but they tend to be exponential, so changes accumulate over time. And so the more time elapses, the larger the scale of change, and so I think that it's important when you consider infrastructure that actually you take up this long-term perspective, which really looks at decades. So that's, I think, a first point. And foresight is very well suited to this. So I don't want to spend too much time going into the details of the methods, but I think that here it's absolutely a normal match. Regarding the safe space, that's also fundamental to good quality foresight. Thank you for having asked this question. That's why very typically foresight exercises are run in conditions of Chatham House rules, meaning everybody must feel free to say what they want to say, and nothing is ever going to be attributed to any single person. So the outcomes of foresight exercises, are always the outcomes of group work. It's a particular group of people working together in these specific conditions that came up with that outcome, these specific reflections. And so it's extremely important to make sure that people feel safe when they do these foresight exercises. And the whole purpose of these foresight exercises and scenario building in particular is to actually help people think the unthinkable and sometimes dare to say stuff which is let's say taboo. And I've seen quite a few foresight exercises where people actually come up with their taboos quite quickly, and quite early in the process. And actually that's very encouraging because the scenarios don't exist, they're not material, it's just a product of imagination that actually allow people to consider things which can be disturbing, in a public sphere. And you can discuss these things within the confines of a foresight workshop, and that's quite comfortable. And actually, yesterday I was in a conversation where people were talking specifically about that. But then you have to, I was mentioning risk communication and risk perception. So when you actually come out with a public result, or outcome of these Foresight exercises, then you can decide to not to say some things, not to afraid to frighten people, things like that. So you have a strategic game to play in terms of one, what you do internally to actually get prepared and actually consider things in as usefully as possible, and being able to consider what you don't want to happen to get ready to avoid it. But at the same time, you can be careful in terms of what you communicate about this to make sure that you have an optimum impact on your target audiences, whether it is the decision makers, attributing resources to preparedness, or whether it's the public, to help them prepare. And so yes, here this question of the safe space is absolutely crucial to take into account and to preserve in the Foresight process.
Thank you. Thank you. There are some very practical tips already in terms of organizing and handling the Foresight process. But thank you, Laurent, for these explanations. I think we can continue this discussion when also the other presenters have opened our perspectives. So I would warmly now welcome also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I would welcome Simone now to open her. Yes, thank you, Simone. I will very briefly introduce Simone Kimpeler. She's the head of Competence Center for Foresight at Fraunhofer Institute. And her research focuses on the design and application of foresight methods for strategy development in policymaking, industry, and business and society. But they have, with our Competence Center for Foresight, they have also several experiences and of embedding the foresight principles into the EU disaster resilience policies. For example, the foresight process within the European Topic Center Sustainability Transitions for the European Environmental Agency, or the futures dialogues that they have on the transformative resilience in the pollution crisis. So, Simone, we are really excited to hear more about these very practical experiences of applying the foresight in the process of risk identification and on the European level. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kati, for this introduction, and also for to the organizers for inviting me. I'm very happy to share some insights here, and also happy to be the speaker right after Laurent, because there are some really good links between our presentations and learnings we want to share. First of all, I realized that there are already some more questions in the chat, in the questions and answers section. So please be aware that we are not able to answer all the questions right now while we are speaking, but we will definitely then maybe come back to the questions at a later stage. And first of all, my presentation, which I prepared together with my colleague Aaron Rosser here from Fraunhofer ISI, is about the foresight cycle and how to apply it. And I would like to use this concept of foresight as a process, which we are using here in our institute, as an example to, on the one hand, explain why foresight is not something you do just once, but something you should do constantly, and also why foresight is something that is actually very important to link the individual, personal, psychological aspects of dealing with futures and uncertainties for each one of us with the societal or group dynamics we are facing at the same time within our smaller groups like families, but also neighborhood, companies, regions, countries, and of course in the world. So let me start. So first of all, who are we? Because this is maybe just good to know to better understand later my points I will raise here. So we are, I'm at the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research, and Fraunhofer ISI in Germany, in Karlsruhe, is one of 76 institutes from the Fraunhofer Society, which is a university research organization, an applied research organization. So we conduct applied innovation research, and we support decision makers from industry, academia, and policymaking in making strategic decisions. So on the one hand, for doing this, you need, of course, specific domain competences, which are represented in different departments here, but you also need specific methodological competences, which I represent, for instance, with the Foresight approach. Within this institute, there is a competence center, Foresight. So what do? We develop and facilitate processes of strategic foresight for policy and administration, business and industry, research and civil society. So this means for everybody or for all. This also implies that we cannot use standardized processes or products and reproduce these constantly, but we have to really customize the specific way of dealing with very specific questions from very specific perspectives, together with really specifically selected experts and stakeholders in each of our projects. So we try to help to navigate through complexities of uncertain futures, in particular those with longer term impacts. And as Laurent already pointed out, dealing with the uncertainties arising from realizing that the future is not predictable, it's not clear what will come. There are always cross impacts between different influencing factors. And it is really important to realize that even in the worst scenario one could imagine, there are still developments which would be helpful, necessary. So how can we identify these? How can we extract these from the context in which we wouldn't like them to happen? And how can we, for example, by doing this, being able to create or to contribute to creating a future which is more in our favor? So, and something which is very important here is the questioning of biases and heuristics in futures thinking. And I'm going to talk about this right after this slide. And Laurent already mentioned this too. So when you are thinking about long-term developments, and in particular about things to worry about risks or disasters which might come, there is always fear related. And fear really brings us to use, first of all, to think quick, to use patterns we can apply in different situations to come to a decision which gives us a more or less feeling of, okay, this is logic, this makes sense. So in psychology, this has been studied intensely and still is. And we realized a couple of years ago that there are some very important learnings and insights from these research on biases and heuristics in psychology, which can be applied to foresight, and even how foresight can contribute to questioning and to dealing with these biases we have. And biases are good, so it's not that we want to avoid them, but it's more that we want to be aware of their role and how we might maybe think in alternative futures to challenge our own biases. And for this, I now would like to introduce the foresight cycle. Before I do this, just one quote don't worry, I'm not going to read it out. I highlighted the most important things here. And this is a source, or this is a quote from the Strategic Foresight report from the European Commission, which we fully agree to, that foresight is a discipline of exploring, anticipating, and shaping. So it's about learning, and it's also about thinking how to bring the insights to action. Then it's about build and use collective intelligence. So this is also about involving expertise, stakeholders, broaden the perspectives as much as possible by inviting people, by doing workshops, by discussing. And then it's also about structured and systemic processes. And this is something which may also provide a first answer to one of the questions in the questions and answers section. So there was one about how do we at the end bring together all the different perspectives and insights to really answer the initial question. And this is what is implied here. So you have a big question, but to answer the big question, which is so embedded in uncertainties, it is important to divide the big question into many smaller questions, answer them separately, bring them together in a plausible way, for example, with a scenario technique. And then at the very end, of course, task is to go one step back, to have a broader picture of what you have produced, and then answer your big question again. And here again, scenario technique is very helpful to do this. And most important for all of our foresight experts and practitioners in our community is that we constantly repeat, foresight is not about predicting. We are not telling the future. We are helping you to deal with the uncertainty. So you have to accept uncertainty, but you will figure out that doing foresight will at least allow you to identify risks and opportunities which are across the different futures which might come. And so at the end, you know which risks you should address or which opportunities you should support, no matter what exactly the future will look like. So the foresight cycle. This is, of course, a very simple model, but it helps understanding how we work. The first step is the scanning, horizon scanning, identifying change. So here you do use, for example, some models like the STEEP model for making sure that you have a 360-degree perspective scope of emerging signals of change. You have to do a scoping at the very beginning. So where exactly do we need to look at? What type of changes are we interested in? What other types of changes should we not really focus on so much? You can also use AI here. We are constantly doing research on this, how to apply machine learning in scanning processes. At the moment, we are really convinced that it still needs humans to make sense out of the signals identified by machines. But of course, we are happy to learn. Then the next step, when you have a long list of possible trends and possible influences on the area you're looking at, you have to do some inside sense-making activities, interpreting the change. So here it is about assessment of the trends, doing further research, inviting experts who should confirm or who should consider if these trends are really plausible and what would be the main drivers behind it. When you know more about this, you start doing the next step, which is the strategy development. And here you have to imagine the change. So you're thinking about the future, about a very concrete moment in the future. So how can we imagine it? For this, for example, the scenario, already mentioned scenario processes and methods are very helpful. I'm going to explain this further later. And then when you have different plausible images of the future, let it be scenarios, which are plausible in the way that it's not just wishful thinking, and very good and stable scenarios developed in a transparent process usually are all possible, all plausible, and all are not only good or only bad. So good scenarios are always scenarios which describe a future in which both good and bad things are involved, because this is the reality at the end. And this helps you to identify the risks and the opportunities across the different scenarios you're looking at, instead of focusing only on the good one or the most wanted one and do everything to get there, because doing this implies that you really lose sight of the developments in the other imaginaries, in the other scenarios, which are actually as plausible as the one you are hoping for. So the scanning in the first phase, here we use methods like weak signals scanning, drivers of change identification. We apply scientometric methods, in particular when it's about technology trends. We also have developed AI-based automated scanning tools and constantly further develop them. And expert search is still very needed. So it's really relevant to look also at fringe sources, not only at the most important ones, the most obvious sources, but also in particular identify sources for signals which are usually not in focus of the decision makers. Then in the second step, the sense making, you do, for example, the systems analysis. Who are the main actors? Who are in the driving seat? Who are the future actors and stakeholders? This is very important because you are not actually developing actions for a world today. You are developing actions to apply today for a world in the future. So think about also the possible future stakeholders in your scenarios, in your future. Then it's about the evaluation of the signals. You really have to make sure that the signal for a trend is not just, a hot thing going on and dead tomorrow, but is it really something which is really based on indicators, and are there different analysis all supporting this trend? So is it really something you really can rely on, at least for the further discussion here? And then, of course, you can also here start inviting more perspectives by surveys, by evaluations, for example, Delphi surveys, which is also a very common tool in this phase. The next step, when you have these trends and drivers, now it's about imagining how the future will look like. Here you're going to use the long list of possible factors, and you invite people representing the future world in terms of stakeholders, decision makers, different actors within the system. And you have to prioritize which of the factors are the most relevant ones. For example, we usually have a long list of more than 50 driving factors, but at the end, in a scenario process, you only use 10, maximum 15. This does not mean that the scenarios are not really valid or something like this. Instead, it means that you start with these most important 15 ones to produce the skeleton of the future scenarios, and the other 40 factors can then be used for adding further information, further narratives to the scenarios you have developed. So everything you have analyzed so far is not to put somewhere on the shelf when not used in the scenario process. Instead, this is all material that will be helpful for later stages. Here it's very important that that you make sure that there are expectations in the heads of the people, there are biases. So all methods applied here need to address these, really need to make sure that at least people are aware of own biases, and also, as we cannot overcome them, of course, make sure that at least different perspectives are there to challenge each other's biases. And then the last step is then bringing the findings into the practice. How can we use them for strategy, for new operations actions towards the goal? Here you use, for example, the scenarios and the insights from the scanning. You can do some scenario backcasting. So what can we learn from the future about the processes and decisions we make today? You can do wind tunneling in trying to figure out how vulnerable these scenarios are against possible threats or developments. You can do road mapping, where you identify needs for action to specific challenges you have seen with the scenarios, and who should do what when. And then the roadmap can also be used, of course, for the implementation of a new strategy. So how to create a safe space for dangerous conversations like this one's? I'm really happy that the question has been raised by someone in the questions and answers section, because this is really important. You need to produce or to have a safe space for all of these, because actually foresight, when you think about risks and disasters, is about fear and worries and about uncertainties. So we know from psychology that worries, if not expressed and shared and discussed, become a very heavy load, blocking the whole organism to function well. And this applies not only for individuals, this applies also for organizations and, of course, nations and the society as a whole. And we believe that foresight can, or actually foresight is dealing with this. So foresight can provide a space to get rid, or not get rid, but at least to share the worries, to share the knowledge, and to also discuss different perspectives, and then get rid of some of this heavy load of worrying, and at the same time identifying possible ways for action to support opportunities, or to make use of opportunities to reach a goal you all agree upon, or of course, more important, to avoid risks. The cognitive biases and the heuristics and the filters of perception we have are highly relevant for futures thinking. So there is a publication by 3 colleagues of my team where they identified from the many hundreds of biases analyzed in psychology, they identified in particular those biases and heuristics of futures thinking who are important for the application and conceptualization of foresight methods, and in particular of scenario thinking. So the cognitive biases are systematic patterns of information filtering during subjective world building, and they deviate from objective reality, and they of course impact personal behavior. The heuristics are the mental shortcuts or simple rules that enable us to engage with surroundings in an efficient way. So both of these are nothing we want to get rid of. They are really helpful and useful. We really need these, but how can we make use of them? So there are some examples here. Looking at the time, I'm not going to read this out, of course, but I think you already know what type of biases we are talking about here. So it's about that we already see evidence where we actually should look a bit closer, that we try to transfer some relationships between variables, like between people, events, and behaviors, and transfer them to other situations, and that we usually think that the future might not change as much as the past did. So how can we make use of this in Foresight? This is a scenario tunnel, and applying this circle of Foresight, at the beginning, you have to identify the weak signals of possible change. In the second phase, you have to explore the possible assumptions for each key factor you have identified. So from the very lot of factors of change, some are in color here. So these are the key factors. And for each key factor, you have to think of alternative, but still plausible possible developments. Could it be in the future look like version A? Yes, but it could also be totally different, version B, and it could also be something as a mix of A and B, which would be C. And sometimes we even have D and E. So you will have then the possibility to cluster these different diverse possibilities into plausible scenarios. And these different assumptions for each factor really then could be the skeleton of a new future imaginary. And then at the last step, you can use these really very brief possible pictures to develop narratives, to identify risks for your organization or for your country. You can identify opportunities. The most interesting ones are those which can be found in all of the scenarios, because then you have to address them anyway, and you really can change your strategy accordingly. And you can then develop actions and prioritize them in roadmaps. So this is my last slide, and I'm here showing you the list of biases and heuristics which we identified, which are in particular important for scenario processes. So in our methods, we try to organize the discussions, the groups, the templates used in these discussions accordingly to address these future-related biases. There is one example about a project for the European Commission where we use these. The whole process, starting with scanning. This is about how how consumption might change across Europe after the pandemic in the next 15 years. And we did this scanning process. We developed key factors who could make a change in consumer behavior. And we developed scenarios for different scenarios in a workshop together with stakeholders and experts. And then we analyzed the 4 scenarios and realized that there are some common risks and some common challenges for consumer protection and support of vulnerable groups. And we developed suggestions for action for the European Commission, and some of these are now at place in some programs. So we think that it really worked. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Simone. This was very insightful. Thank you for going even more in depth in terms of the methodologies. And I see that there are actually, and I was also very much intrigued by this dangerous conversations kind of notion that you use, and there are some questions in the chat as well concerning that how do you manage the narratives that are sort of brought up in the discussions, and how do you make sure that these narratives are indeed kind of reflecting some sort of objective projections rather than being manipulated by some sort of adversarial thinking. Yeah, very interesting. I think we can. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on that? There is a very concrete questions on. Please give some examples of dangerous conversations.
Yes, thank you. I can address directly some of the questions. Thank you very much. I'm trying to catch up here. There's a long list of questions, so
there is probably we cannot cover all of them.
Yes, but I have an idea to how to start. So one is about that I said that foresight is exploratory, but how can we deal with ambiguity depending on cultural values and consensus and these things? So I think that this is a very good question, because at the moment we are in a big transformation. So it's not only digital, it's decarbonization in its society, its economy towards circular economy. So we are really in a multiple transformation process, and these transformations usually they all carry some normative aspects, because for a transformation you already have an understanding of where you want to end. So you want to be sustainable and decarbonized in 2050 in Europe. So here you have already a normative setting. When you now develop scenarios, it is clear that all the scenarios you are developing for such normative futures, they are all about reaching this goal. So you probably will not discuss a scenario which is a decarbonized world, but you will discuss scenarios of a decarbonized world which look very different. And then you realize that, of course, decarbonization could mean a lot, and it could be reached by bottom-up processes, communities. It could also be reached by top-down processes, by European Commission, or by nations, or by regions, or by the US. Yeah, so you can really start thinking about getting there. Still is not easy and not clear. So we still have to do a lot to get there. So focus with some normative aspects here. I hope this is a bit an explanation of how we deal with it. It's probably not the full answer to the question. Cultural values, consensus. So this is why we invite a broad variety of experts and stakeholders, and we always do this stakeholder analysis in each process at the beginning, trying to make sure that all regions are represented, all gender, all ages, and everything. And this is very difficult, as you know, because you might invite people, but then still they would not come. So we always try to do this in a sufficient way. Example for a safe space is actually a workshop. So it's a workshop where you, at the beginning, invite people, that you make sure that the people get to know each other in a way at the beginning with some questions and answers, icebreakers. You really guarantee that everything that is discussed in the room stays in the room. This is very important. Insights can be used, but never connected to people. And we have very, very good experience with this. On the other hand, every workshop we are doing is not only a dialogue, a moderated dialogue, it's always related to some game style tasks. So whenever people answer the questions and start the discussion, they are also in a type of game setting. And they do this because they are asked to do it. So it's not that they feel like I'm going to say something I always wanted to say. I'm going to play now with the others in thinking aloud into some uncertain, some unsafe space. So this is really something that people do together, decide that they are open for this. And for me personally, my best day is always when people after a workshop are saying, actually, I haven't thought about this in this way before. So this is all I want to do, all I want to reach.
We have Daniela online who would like to speak directly.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Really interesting presentation, Simon. My question is about the possibility. I would like to know if you, at the end of the process or some year later, had the opportunity to check how things really went and how useful were your foresight toward the process. So a kind of check. I know that you do not predict future, of course, but you have some perspectives, and then you probably have had the possibility to see how things went. Could you elaborate on this? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And really, thank you how you stated your question, because you really avoided the problem. So definitely, we are not checking whether our scenarios became true, because they are not meant to be something like this. They are just an instrument. So we never produce scenarios as a product in Foresight. The customers, the clients, usually in between the processes, they still sometimes return to this idea of, yes, and then we have the scenarios and we publish them and we say, yes, you can do it. But actually, the scenarios are your tool to think about the future. What you should publish is the risks and the opportunities you identified. And you can use narratives to describe them. But be aware that only the scenarios are that you are not something that people immediately can use. Then what people are asking for is advice of what you have learned out of this foresight process, and not only what you have seen in the future. So this is the difference. And then when we have recommendations for actions, what is the result, or was it successful? What I can say now is that most of my projects are with policymakers and at policy levels, at different policy levels, from regional to EU. And here you really have longer time periods. So, and also we are an innovation research institute. So we think about things, for example, for the Ministry of Research and Education or for DG Research, they are now thinking about possible programs which will be implemented in the coming years, running for several years, in which then innovations will be developed for a couple of years, and then it will take again a couple of years until they will be in the market or in the society. So here we really have the long-term perspective. And for me, success is there when I realize that the program has started. Or that, for example, the ministry in Germany, they started a new department on machine-human relationships after one of our foresight processes. So they changed actually their internal dealing with the future of technology and humans by creating a new department. So these are little sites which were not the core of the goal, but which are showing us that the results are used in a way.
Thank you so much. I think, Simone, I think we could leave some of these questions that we still have and very bear in mind until we also hear Jussi's conversation and Jussi's presentation from Finland.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Simone, for your talk. And please, of course, stay with us so that we can continue this discussion after Jussi's presentation.
I will. Bye.
Thank you.
Now.
So Jussi Korhonen is with us from Ministry of Interior, Finland, and he's a director of civil emergency preparedness in the department of the Ministry of Interior in Finland. And he has long-term experience in the fields of civil protection, civil defense, and civil emergency preparedness. and his unit is responsible for national civil defense preparedness planning and the operational steering of preparedness activities of rescue and national coordination tasks of regional preparedness. And he acted as a chairperson of the working group for Finnish national risk assessment, where they applied also the Foresight principles, and very recently also produced the reports that are also available in English. And we were very excited to read them, and so excited now to hear directly from Jussi your experience in the very practical risk assessment conducted in Finland. Please, Jussi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think you can see the slides and hear my voice also. I'm sorry, I got a common flu, so there might be some problem, but I hope not during my presentation. Thank you for this opportunity to tell you or give you a brief overview of the Finnish application of Foresight in our national risk assessment and also regional risk assessments. First of all, I would like you to focus to understand how we did national risk assessment. We have a security strategy for society that defines the vital functions of Finnish society, 7 vital functions, and almost 60 different kind of strategic tasks for different branches of government. They are defined in this strategy, and this national risk assessment is linked to that strategy. So keep this in mind when we go forward. What is the purpose of the national risk assessment? This was a third cycle we compiled the national assessment, but the main function is that it lays the foundation for preparedness of Finnish society in line with the security strategy. It supports preparedness planning at all operational levels, of course, national level, but also regional and local level also. In addition to national risk assessment and regional risk assessment, we have a branch-specific risk analysis methods. Also, for example, rescue services, we have very detailed risk analysis method that complement all these other products or processes. The latest national risk assessment was published in last February, and it looks at disruptions, threats, and events that may or might develop quite suddenly. They require some kind of crisis resilience or preparedness measures. All of those risks that we wanted to identify and did identify, they have a wide national impact, and they have an impact on the vital functions of society. Finnish national risk assessment is not limited only to civil protection. It has one kind of holistic approach to national risks because of its link to security strategy. You can download in English the report on the national risk assessment. You can find it also by Googling. The structure of the risk assessment report, we have 3 main chapters. First one is where we tell how the risk assessment is being done, how was the work processed, and so on. Then we have it's not quite the core of the risk assessment. We have a chapter that goes through transformation of security environment, some large phenomena that are happening or other other major issues that affect the security environment. Then the core of the risk assessment is the chapter 3, assessed threat scenarios and disruption. Today we have also been talking about like a broad spectrum of stakeholders or actors in foresight activities or risk assessment activities. Well, we had in Finland, we had the working group was, I would say, very broad. Ministry of the Interior was the coordinator. All other ministries participated. Also, Secretariat of the Security Committee, National Emergency Supply Agency, Finnish Meteorological Institute, also representatives from regional level. So the state administrative agencies were involved, and also NGOs. The Finnish Red Cross represented the NGOs, and all these members or members in the working group, they used their own experts in their branches. They used, I would say, tens of experts participated in this process. The working group was something like 15 to 20 persons, and yeah, it was very broad-based work. The chapter 2, where we identified some of the like major phenomena that we face now and in near future. It's not a complete list of major events or scenarios or phenomena that go on in the Finnish society, but we wanted to focus on some of those, and we described those phenomena. All of those they have a quality that they either may affect or have effect on the probability of disruptions or events or hazards, or the impact, the level of impact may change because of those phenomena. So that's chapter 2 in a nutshell. Probably quite familiar phenomena for most of you also. Chapter 3 is the core of the national risk assessment. We identified 21 threat scenarios or events and disruptions which were assessed in detail manner and in the same method. Most of those risks that we identified, they are the same as they were in the last cycle of risk assessment in 2018. Also, some new events or threats or hazards were assessed. This time, wildfires, several simultaneous wildfires, and extremely strong space weather storm. So not very large changes in this cycle when it comes to the identified threats and events. Maybe more change in the description and the assessment, the impact assessment level. So how did we do the work? First, as I told you, we identified the threats. The different branches of administration, for example, Ministry of Interior, we sort of own some of those threats. For example, large accidents, they are in the field of Ministry of Interior. All of those identified threats were described verbally. So the draft verbal description was made by the owner, I would say, of that threat or event, and then it was verbally described in a similar kind of structure. Each one of those events had the underlying threat or threat, what is the root cause of that event, and the main functions affected by the realization of this threat, and the possible event path and cascading of impacts and disruption. So each ministry or each agency did the drafting, and then we discussed the verbal descriptions in the work group and made changes and added some elements and so on. And all of those verbal descriptions, then we made the impact assessment of each scenario or event or disruption. And we used a 4-level scale on the impact assessment, and we assessed the impact on vital functions. So the vital functions described in security strategy. How we did the impact assessment? We used common like framework, and the assessment description was no impact, and then mild or limited impact on the functioning and maintenance of a single strategic task. So the 60 tasks involved in maintaining or securing the vital function. Significant impact, maybe it has the event has significant impacts on the strategic levels. It might be still limited impact on those strategic tasks and eventually the vital functions. And then the 4th level was severely compromising impact, extremely significant impacts, large-scale impacts on the execution. Maybe we or the authorities need additional powers to safeguard those strategic tasks. As was the case in verbal description of each event, the party owning the event description also made the preliminary impact assessment, and then we discussed and maybe changed the impact assessment during our work group meetings. And the work was adjusted and coordinated by Ministry of Interior. This is one of the examples. I'm not going to present all of those scenarios or events. This is an example of a severe nuclear power plant accident in Finland or in Finnish neighborhood. That kind of quite rough impact assessment. It's not very detailed. There are certain things we wanted to take care of. We don't want to reveal vulnerabilities on a very technical level or things like that. We had to took into account. It's a public document in the end. So all the vital functions and then impact assessment. It might seem a very easy task, but I can tell you it wasn't. So basically that's the Finnish application on national level. And then we see the regional risk assessments and national risk assessments. They they form the overall risk assessment system, or they are very important parts of that system in Finland. This was a second time we also carried out the regional risk assessment cycle. They are supplemented, the national risk assessment is supplemented by these regional risk assessment, but these regional, they provide a more detailed view of the potential risks and preparedness needs of different regions. In May 2022, we gave the regions an assignment to prepare these risk assessments. The work was on the regional level. It was coordinated by the regional state administrative agencies and the regional rescue departments, and it was completed in 18 regions. It was also carried out in very broad-based regional cooperation. All of those 18 regions, they finished the work in last spring, and now we are doing a national analysis on those regional assessments, also using artificial intelligence. Before we started that regional assessment cycle, we had a working group that we prepared this kind of methodological guideline, and the manual was used in all those regions. And unfortunately, this guideline is only published in Finnish, but public document anyways. The objective of regional risk assessment, first of all, it's a way to create a shared understanding of risks among the operators at the regional and local level. But it also provides a foundation for regional preparedness, regional exercises. Regions should exercise or train for risks that they see or are the most relevant. It was also done in quite broad-based cooperation. The regional rescue departments coordinated that job. There was security authorities, police, border guard, Finnish Defence Forces participated in this process. Other regional authorities and municipal authorities. Business life, we have the security of supply organization in Finland. They organize also at the regional level, and we used representatives from business life in this process also. And also some of the NGOs that are active in respective areas or regions. Also, we have a system in Finland. We have this county-based regional preparedness and security forums or cooperation bodies, and they were also they have been also utilized in this risk assessment process. It depends on the region, of course. This was the assessment itself. It was a bit more detailed than in national risk assessment. All those they did the identification, of course. They identified those regional risks and described them verbally. Either they were hazards or events, whatever you want to call them, and they used pretty much the same kind of starting point as in national risk assessment. The assessment itself was a bit more detailed. We don't have the probability assessment in national risk assessment, but in the regional risk assessment, they used 1 to 5 scale. Then impacts and consequences, there were different kind of categories of impacts: direct impacts, social impacts, disruption, change, and cascading effects, and also reliability of the assessment. Some of the assessments, they might be more scientific. For example, flooding, we have quite good maps and risk assessment when it comes to flooding, but some of them are a bit more vague, I would say. Different kind of risk teams were identified at the regional level, and now we are compiling the national report, and we'll see what new information comes from that national report. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer if you have any questions.
Kati, switch on your microphone.
You are muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I just thank you so much, Jussi, for this very detailed insight to the risk assessments and how you applied the foresight thinking and thinking in terms of the long-term trends as well in your risk assessment process. There are a few direct questions, I think, that are very applicable to your presentation particularly. Sarah Schubert asks, and I read it from the questions. One of the biggest challenges is cascading events and compound events. In the risk register, you have identified individual risks. How do you assess cascading and compounding risks?
Yes, that's one thing we identified that when we go the next cycle, we agreed with the working group that next time we will produce a manual before we start this process again, and that's one thing we want to develop. We have some new tools also that we are right now testing, I would say, in the artificial intelligence also, but some visual elements and how to describe those cascading effects, and also scenarios that some of those or multiple of those events that we identified, they are happening simultaneously. That's one thing we are going to develop next cycles. Very good question.
Thank you so much. There is another question that is targeted to Jussi. So this concerns very particularly the military attacks and potential threat to Finland. Have you considered scenarios regarding these military attacks as well?
Yes. The military attack or military threats against or to Finland, we have always had them in threat models, and we also have them it's not very detailed, but we have a scenario or event also, and as you can probably guess, the impact assessment is quite clear. It has impact on all those vital functions. It's part of this also, and we operate in Finland. We operate in comprehensive. It's like an umbrella comprehensive concept of comprehensive security, and as I told you, the threat model, the armed attack against Finland, we have always had it in our threat models, also concerning the civil sectors, not only defense forces or military defense. We also have civil defense system in Finland. It's quite natural also to include it in national risk assessment.
Considering the circumstances, yes.
Yes, especially now.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah. Jussi, I take this liberty as the organizer of the webinar and ask you a direct question about the experiences of organizing the different stakeholders to be part of this foresight process in the risk assessment. And can you say, because that's quite an extraordinary achievement, I must say, when we have conducted analysis across different countries and across the globe, there are not very many examples of really trying to apply the foresight techniques in the risk assessments. So can you say a few words what has been really kind of helpful in doing this process, and some words of encouragement for the other civil protection agency representatives in the audience of today's webinar?
In Finland, usually it's not a problem to involve different stakeholders or different parties. They want to involve in this. I told you about the concept of comprehensive security. Even the strategy identifies that not only public sector, but also business life and NGOs, they have their own work, and this all should be done together when it comes to security. It probably has something to do with we are quite small country. We know each other, and most of the civil servants, we are quite security oriented and also regular citizens. So we have a common goal to keep Finland safe. And it's not, well, it's really, when you put a working group like that, very broad-based, of course there's differences. People see, they value different things. Their professional background is different, but I think that's the best part of putting this kind of report or assessment together, seeing it from a different perspectives and different backgrounds. Don't be afraid.
Thank you, Jussi. I think now it would be very good if all the speakers would open their cameras, and so that we can have a common discussion, and taking some of the questions that are still unanswered in the chat or in the questions forum. And Simona is with us as well, I hope. So thank you. There are some, do you want to go by the questions yourself, or pick the questions that you see that would be most relevant to you? Or shall I just guide us by the questions? Sorry, Simone?
Yes, no, I might start if there's nothing,
Yes.
someone else.
Yes.
With the last question raised by Sarah, it's about foresight in governments, and why do governments and regional administrations struggle to use the outputs? I think this is a very interesting question, because it implies that, from her perspective or from the perspective of this question, the output is not used sufficiently, and I think that it's very difficult to evaluate this from outside, because if we talk about risks and disasters and resilience, I think that there is a lot going on in policymaking and in governments, and for the reason of these safe spaces, these things are not always shared. So I think that we have to really appreciate that people in governments also worry and also take care of the problems and discuss them intensely, and they also do a lot of activities here. But the question is, of course, how visible is it? And maybe one could improve the communication about or informing that at least this foresight is done, and that there are things going on for preparing for disasters and risks. Because we have, for example, projects where we know that it's not good to talk about that we even do this project with this question, because, for example, some other countries might react very negatively if they realize that this what if question has been raised at all, although it doesn't imply that someone is expecting that this would happen, but that this is discussed, is already something which really should be handled with care, how to communicate about this, because it could also feed into the worries and all the anxieties people already have, in particular in times of crisis. But please don't think that I don't want transparency about Foresight. It is just that we have to understand that very often policymakers handle it very carefully to communicate what they are really discussing in behind the walls and the doors.
If I can add to what Simone was saying, I'm completely aligned with Simone's presentation. I think it was very useful that she went into these details about the biases and things like that. It's really important to understand. And the diversity of participants, is pretty much the only weapon we have to fight the biases, because human beings are human beings and we're all affected by them. But I think that in terms of how difficult it is for the system to use the results of Foresight, yesterday we were actually having a discussion about this, and very often there's a problem with lack of Foresight literacy. So there's a cultural problem here, and I think more people should be familiar with futures thinking and Foresight to actually be able to use what comes out of this at its proper value. I think another problem we're facing is the electoral cycles. So you've got a system that, at least in our democratic societies, a sort of short-termist thinking, which is imposed by the electoral cycle. So you have a focus which is very often linked to 3-5 year cycles, and it's very difficult for people to project themselves further and to actually make use politically of longer timeframes. And another issue we touched upon was that in many governments, Foresight is not institutionalized properly. So you don't have a good place to go to, let's say, when you have a Foresight need, which is trusted and recognized by people. And so very often that's missing. And so you see a lot of ad hoc initiatives emerging, here and there. And then it might have, some impact at some point, but the continuity is difficult. So these are 3 points that emerged yesterday in our discussions yesterday.
Thank you. Any comments by Jussi regarding this institutional support? Because I recognize as if you have it in place, sort of a nice sort of collaboration between the Foresight thinkers and the disaster managers.
Yeah.
Got it right?
Yeah. Well, this was third time, and you have to understand that it's also expert level, or even if it's ministerial level, the participant in the were compiling this risk assessment. It's not political paper. We just try to identify possible events or possible disruptions. And when it comes to political decision making, things are a bit more complicated than just assessing risks. But all of those risks, they are reality. They might happen, and we have had quite good experiences. For example, the national risk assessment is now being used as a starting point for government resolution on national national security of supply, new resolution that they is in progress. So we really use it, and different branches use it as a basis for their preparedness activities. They use the same platform. It's not been. It hasn't been. There hasn't been any large discussion on the political level on the risk assessment. Its purpose is quite well understood.
So it seems that this kind of module of having the foresight thinkers available to different kinds of different fields in the government, it could be something that can be taken over by the other countries as well, I guess. But let's maybe continue with the questions that we have in the chat as well. There is one, thank you, Sarah, for very insightful questions. The last one is, are there any examples where you have got the foresight process wrong? And what did you learn from these examples? Because this is a question to Lauren and Simone, who are really have very extensive experiences in the foresight process.
Thanks a lot for this. I'll quickly say something. I think we should get out of this thing of getting it right or getting it wrong. I mean, it's not that simple. And in foresight, as Simona was saying earlier, we're not trying to predict what is going to happen, but we're more trying to help people think more broadly and actually use that enhanced understanding for better decision making. So that's the thing. So I think the issue we're facing here is not so much an issue of getting it right or getting it wrong. It's more an issue of, have we been successful in actually enhancing the capacity of the decision makers to think and to take more information into account, to have a better evidence-informed policy making. So here that's you know, where the difficulty is, and the three barriers I was mentioning just before, for example, they play into this. You know, so we might have the opportunity to run a foresight exercise. Often we don't really have the time or the resources to do something as good as we would like to do, but okay, that's real life. But then very often it's the final step, which is very often the difficult one, you know, to actually reach the right people in terms of having enhance their capacity to think and to take into account other things and to reassess some basic assumptions. So that's where evaluation of impact, let's say, is often difficult with foresight, because foresight is also never the only one influencing the decision making. You know, it's always one source of information among many, and one source of influence among many. And so it's very difficult to single out, let's say, the unique contribution that foresight has brought, you know, compared to the whole set of inputs that are used to reach a decision.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think it's also that foresight process is a kind of journey, and there are different steps and things you might have not already addressed or focused on in the first phase of the scanning. They would at least become visible when you start prioritizing the drivers you identified. And it's absolutely often the case, and also encouraged by us, that when we look at the long list, we, as a result of the first step, that people start thinking of, oh, there's something missing. And this is exactly what should happen. So that we did something from our perspective as a classical foresighter, present these are main drivers for your area. Then they say, yes, but there's something else. And this is what we need. And then, so actually there is a constant learning during the process. And very often we have a very strict plan for a workshop, a very detailed agenda, even who is saying what when in minutes. But for sure, this always is changed in the process, because we realize, no, we can't do it right now. It doesn't work. The groups are too small, or the mix of the group is not right for this topic. So let's rearrange it. So here you need a lot of experience and flexibility to moderate it and to really change it to, at the very end, after 2 days, you are happy that you did something different than planned, but you have results that really improve the thinking.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think this goes very nicely in order to respond also to the question regarding the other alternatives designs in terms of thinking about the systems. Design thinking was mentioned in the chat. How can we use foresight in complementary to the design thinking, for example?
Yeah, I can answer this very quickly. We often have a link to design thinking methods in the very last phase, where it comes to what do we know about possible futures, and then we need products or tools to use, and then design thinking methods are very helpful to develop concrete artifacts representing the future, or even already being artifacts to be used to get to this future. And here the classical design thinking approach is very helpful. It's not very often part of our tasks, actually. I'm a bit sad about it because it's the very last step and we are more often involved in the earlier steps of this cycle, but it's exactly where it's needed.
And to complement this, where we are in the Competence Center of Foresight, we are actually part of the EU Policy Lab, which contains a behavioral insights group and a design group. And so we do integrate this together also, exactly in line with what Simona was saying.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that actually our time for these 2 hours has run out, but I have a very important last question about what would be the possibilities on the European level to make use of these experiences of the Foresight and put these into really contact with our disaster management planners and risk assessment conductors in the civil protection authorities in our nation states and member states of the European Union. Is there a possibility for some sort of a collaborative network, or how could we build this build from this momentum, for example, today when we have 360 or even more people, mostly from the policymaker side, but also from the practitioners in the disaster management planning. How can we create a support network that would bring these Foresight ideas closer to these practitioners? Any ideas, maybe?
Yes, last week we were actually having a workshop with our Secretariat General colleague, where we are actually wanting to strengthen all the networks that we can mobilize for the use of Foresight in any sort of public functions. So of course we start with the Commission, but we want to promote the use of Foresight for decision making really across the board, and more specifically on risk. I think here we have my colleague Tomi Esikainen, who is working on our future risk project, who will want to engage with Roadmap 2, exactly to be able to create this, to have a resource on Foresight available to the risk community. And in the GRC, we also can connect this to the people our colleagues in ISPRA who work on disaster risk management and who have a very long established practice there. So yes, there is absolutely resources available to strengthen this complementarity between Foresight and disaster risk management.
Excellent. Let's use and capitalize on these already ongoing thoughts about how to support and how to support each other in the research, but also more practical application of these techniques. But Daniela, you have your hand raised. Please.
Yeah, just to bring you an experience that we recently did in the Italian Civil Protection Department. We applied these techniques in a specific field because it was about the future of the volunteers organizations. So they were asked to work applying these techniques to see how to avoid this topic futures and to focus on desirable futures. So probably one way to use these techniques is to select specific fields where to start, because if you want to apply in a holistic approach, at the end it will be difficult. Whereas if you find some specific topics or groups that may be interested, this could be a way to start. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Any responses? I think this is what we can agree.
We agree.
Taking smaller steps.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally evolving towards larger fields. Yeah.
Yes, and it's not about advertising. I have no illusions here. It's just about supporting you. So when you want to do something like this, please also look for support in your area, because it's important to have, for example, neutral moderators in such types of dialogues, and to have people on board who are experienced in developing scenarios which are not only imagination, but which are really consistent, based on expert assumptions and evaluation. Because otherwise, when you just start thinking about this could happen and this could happen when we want to get there, so what can we do? This would never work, or at least it would not work sufficiently.
Yeah.
I can give you some example. We have a network between Nordic countries because we have quite similar environment and also other structures. We have a network where we discuss maybe once a year, sometimes 2 times a year, but on the methodology, on risk assessments, these national risk assessments, but all other things also, Foresight in general. So you can also use peer help or peer support from neighboring countries, and they have the same problems, and usually we find something to steal from other countries also, methodologically, of course.
Indeed, that sounds also a possibility for closer collaboration between the countries. Yeah, I think we need to stop here, and I'm really sorry that we didn't get to answer all of the questions. But please, of course, be aware that all these materials that have been, and also the video of today's discussions, will be uploaded to our project website, this Roadmap 2 website, so that you can follow this discussion. There are also contacts of our speakers. You can contact them, of course, directly for very specific advice or for answering concrete questions or discussing further. Thank you so much from my side. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you for all the great audience that we had and singing along with the speakers. Over to
Thank
you,
you very much,
amigos, and Daniela.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for managing this wonderful webinar. Of course, I'd like to thank the contribution that was given by the speakers for this very updated topic from the audience that we had between 350 and 400 people during the session from all over the world. We can see that this is very important subject. And this is very much in line with the objectives of our project roadmap, because we are looking for good practices in managing multi-risk problems. And the opening of our eyes to this new process of decision-making, I think it was very good to have in this seminar. Of course, I would like also to thank all the audience and the good, nice comments and positive comments that we received, that we could see in the chat. And as Kathy said, the presentations and all the webinar was recorded, so it will be available to you. So we'll not send in the presentations. You can see them if you wish. And I would like also to thank to my team, Adai, for the material organization of this webinar, which I think was quite successful. The floor is yours now, Daniela.
Yes, just to say a last thank you to Kathy and to Domingos for organizing this very interesting webinar, and thank you all for participating. And I hope that you will be part of our community of experts within the project Roadmap 2. So we consider you on board, and thank you very much for your participation. And say goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.